those of you who don't know, I'm Don Willcock. I'm the president of the Peterborough Historical Society. Nobody else wanted the job. And just a few minutes of business. If you can get to it, at the back table, below the clock, we have some information, membership forms, and that kind of thing for anybody who wants to join the Historical Society. And we can always use members, please. And Hutchison House information. We can always use friend.
Can you turn the sign system up a little louder? It's really
I don't.
hard to get black.
Did something come unplugged?
No, I think they just.
Yell if you have to.
Testing.
How about I just use my projection voice? I will try and so just keep waving at me if you can't hear me.
Oh, that's good. That's good right there.
Okay, so I won't move. Thank you, Al. Okay, where's something to throw at Al? Yeah, so just if anybody is interested in joining the Historical Society or volunteering, we have forms for that. We will be having our annual general meeting in April, and we're looking for new board members. So if you're interested in that, please come and talk to us, or give the Hutchison House a call, and they'll put you through to us. We can really use new members and volunteers because things are getting a little tight since COVID. A lot of people have decided to retire from their volunteering, and we can always use people, but we have a 180-year-old house, 185-year-old house that needs TLC, and so we can use donations as well as workers. And our board, we look after that house and try and run activities and events and things like that. We have a small core of active volunteer board members and volunteers, so please consider it. What else we got here? Let's see. We have one more. We have another heritage luncheon at Hutchison House coming up next. Was it the 5th of February? So if you're interested in that, just call Hutchison House and book. You have to book ahead, otherwise you'll be standing and with no food. Let's see, what else have we got here? I think that's. Oh, we do. Yes, if you can get to them, we do have refreshments and whatnot at the back. But I think without further ado. Oh, I did want to mention the Historical Society did lose, just in the last few weeks, one of our strong driving forces, and that was Jean Marie Cole, who passed away in just the end of the year, and she will be missed. But we're working and maybe have something to commemorate her in the way of naming a room or something like that in a house. It's still in the works. Okay, I think without further ado, Linda, is there anything I missed from Hutchison House? No. We're closed until the end of January. We're doing renovation or work, and we painted the ceiling, and we're doing all kinds of things that works better without having the public come roaming through and pestering us. It'll be all fresh and new when you come back in February. Okay, without further ado, I think I will introduce Brendan Moher, who is the chair of the Nine Ships 1825 organization, and he'll be leading the rest of the night.
Thank you, Don.
You're welcome. Take over.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Don Willcock and the Peterborough Historical Society for hosting us here tonight. Nine Ships 1825 Inc. That's our group that have been set up to help organize the Bicentennial of Peter Robinson. My name is Brendan Moher, and I'm honored to be the president and chair of Nine Ships 1825 Inc. And I respectfully acknowledge that we work and reside on the traditional territory of the Mississauga, Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to our First Nations friends for their care for and teachings about our earth, and our relations. May we honor those teachings. 2025, can you hear me, or do I need the mic here? The mic? Okay. Okay, here we go. 2025, as most people here know, marks the bicentennial year of the Peter Robinson-led Irish emigration to the Peterborough area, which took place back in 1825. That's when 2,024 men, women, and children set sail from the port of Cove, County Cork, Ireland, in 9 ships, hoping to make this wonderful land of shining waters their home. It wasn't easy for them. The number varies, but it's estimated that 320 families were involved, many having to leave loved ones behind with little hope, unfortunately, of ever seeing them again. Our group, 9 Ships, is an incorporated not-for-profit set up with the support of the Peterborough Canadian Irish Club, and the president of the Peterborough Canadian Irish Club is here with us tonight, Shelley Ryan. And with also the support of other community partners throughout Peterborough City, County, and City of Kawartha Lakes. Here tonight with me are my fellow 9 Ships volunteer board members, Mary Smith, our vice chair and former mayor of Selwyn. Mary. Maureen Crowley, the immediate past president of the Peterborough Canadian Irish Club. Maureen, raise your hand. Elwood Jones, former Trent professor, professor emeritus, and now historian with Trent Valley Archives. Elwood. And Dennis Carter Edwards, retired government historian and past president of the Peterborough Historical Society. Dennis, there you are. 9 Ships has been set up to help coordinate, promote, document, and spread information far and wide about the history of the Peter Robinson-led immigration to the Peterborough region and the plans being made by the local Irish community like you to commemorate this historic occasion throughout this bicentennial year of 2025. Historical organizations and grassroots artistic and cultural groups have been compiling historical documents, research, displays, and planning homecomings, a heritage fair, tours, theatrical plays, musical, dance, and other cultural events. It's going to be a very, very busy year. And we have officially launched our 9 Ships Bicentennial website, so you must check it out. 9ships1825.com. That's 9ships1825.com.
That's the word 9, right?
The word spelt out, N-I-N-E. It's an information gateway, really, on the history of the incredible journey of those brave Irish souls who boarded those 9 ships to Canada 200 years, full of hope, for 200 years ago, full of hope for a better life. And the various events and displays planned this year can be found on that website. And Maureen Crowley will go over this with you a little later in the presentation. We have also been reaching out to our friends and the media in the GTA and elsewhere in Canada and North America, to contacts in the Irish government and to economic development organizations in Ireland who plan to mark the occasion themselves. And Mary Smith will give you more information on that later in the presentation. Because, you know, it really was a traumatic event back in Ireland, we must remember, because these families really were split when the immigrants came over, and people never saw their relatives again. Tonight we'll hear some detailed background on how this Peter Robinson emigration to the Peterborough region came about with Elwood Jones. And after that, Dennis Carter Edwards will give us the story of the voyage over here by our Irish ancestors back in 1825 and how they made their way to this part of Canada. Finally, we will be taking questions later on, depending on the time constraints. We have about an hour to do this. So I ask that you please allow the presentations to take place, and then afterwards we'll field some questions. So let me now, to begin, we'll call on Elwood Jones, historian with Trent Valley Archives. Elwood?
I'm glad to see such a good crowd. I wish we were in a bigger room, but that's another matter. All my technical aids today aren't working, so I'm just going to talk a bit about the Peter Robinson emigration events of the 1825. I'm just going to focus on three things. The first I want to talk about is why would people leave Ireland in 1825? The second thing I want to discuss is the question of how local historians, well, sort of the connection of Peterborough to Peter Robinson is what I want for the second thing. And then I will talk about whether Peter Robinson was a good choice for the leader of this experiment, as we would call it. The first thing to say is that the story about the emigration has been handled quite well by local historians. I was quite surprised actually how well, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on how that makes a difference. But what they weren't very good on is knowing what was happening in Ireland. And what I found tended to happen is that people would talk about Ireland as if it was post-famine 1847. But the 1825 experiment is 20 years before the famine, and there's quite a different world. The other thing is that the people who came here didn't come from all over Ireland. They came mainly from the Blackwater Valley, the sort of the northern part of Cork County and neighboring areas. So again, we have to look at the question of what's different about that area compared with Ireland as a whole. And this is what I'm kind of hoping that people will understand. Now, my kind of hope on this came with reading a book by David Dixon called Old World Colony. It's 700 pages, but discusses the 200 years between 1665 and 1830. And during that period, what he's able to say is that this was a very central part of Europe. It was not a backwater. This was an area that had terrific agricultural produce and was in some sense breadbasket of what we would now call England, United Kingdom, kind of thing like that. We had extensive dairying. We had wheat, called corn. We have oats, barley, butter, fish, and potatoes that are all being grown and exported from this particular area. So the sense that we get about this is that the Blackwater Valley itself is fairly interesting because as a river, it allows for some of the transportation stuff to go. For example, the export of potatoes works better with water than it does with roads. And even as it was in Canada, it was a lot easier to ship on water than it was to ship on land because the roads were not very good. This is what is the truth of the matter. But at any rate, I was quite surprised with the diversity of agriculture in Munster, which is the province that Cork is in. Potato was important in crop rotation. It could break up soil. It was also took a lot of effort for seeding, but it was something that could be accomplished. There was demand for potatoes in the cities, but for transporting, harvesting potatoes, it was best to be close to the river because of the weight that was involved with that. Dairying was another major development that occurred in this area in this period. The keeping of swine also grew. Apparently one of the great advantages of swine was that they liked sour milk. So it was a parallel nicely with the dairying that went on. By the 1760s, there were the first signs of protests of tenants and subtenants against Irish landlords that becomes a feature of the story of 1825. A lot of the protests were directed at tithes, which in a sense were like property tax for us, except that in that case the the revenue went to the Church of Ireland, which was the Protestant church within the and the sort of the main administrative part of the rural area. So parts of the problem also came with the renewing of leases with landlords. And when leases came up, landlords would quite often not renew them. Part of the reason for this was, well, the way you look at it is that in order for agriculture to keep up with the growing population, and this is something to say here, that in 1775, it was about 300,000 people living in Ireland, but it was over 1.4 million by the time of the 1820s. So this rapid growth is something we normally would talk about as being a sign of prosperity. That means that the birth rates have been good, death rates have been lower, life expectancy is longer, and it's usually tied with improvements in agriculture. But during this period, there was also a debate going on about how much we could sustain population growth. And this was, in some ways, well, I remember when I was young, there was talk about how would this planet ever be able to sustain 2 billion people. Here we now are at 8 billion, and we're still doing it. And partly it's because agriculture production has been able to keep up with the growth of population. But in the period of the 1820s, there was a fear in the political circles that if you had too much population, Malthus was the one who made it the most clear that population grows geometrically, agriculture grows arithmetically. Some point there's going to be a disaster. It could be settled by either war or famine or something of that nature. So emigration, which only emerges as an idea after 1815, does become a kind of escape valve that we might be able to prevent that disaster that's certain to come if we could only move ahead on this. Now, so that's the main point I wanted to make about Ireland, is that we're talking about coming from a prosperous area into here. So the question of why would you leave, and I think it's because it's like winning the lottery. We're not talking here about push and pull factors of emigration. We're talking about wow factor. That what happened is, because of the disruptions that occurred, that I said started in the 1760s, because of those disruptions, there were people who were identified either as white boys or rabble-rousers or Captain Jack, who would go and put pressure on landlords and the people who were the agents at their places. And this kind of local politics was something that some of the big landlords didn't think was a good idea. Now, the interesting thing here is that the big landowners didn't have a lot of power, because in 1800, because of earlier Irish rebellion, particularly the 1798, Ireland lost its parliament. So the result was that the parliament that was making political decisions here was in Westminster. Now, the Irish had a lot of influence in Westminster, some way the way in which Quebec has influence in Canada, that they will hold together to protect against the bigger mass. So what we have is Irish landlords saying, look, you've got to do something about these darn people. And so in that respect, the 1825 emigration is a policing action, as the words that was used by Sir Robert Wilmot Horton, who was the person who invented this idea, that it was possible for the British government to fully subsidize an emigration from Southern Ireland, hoping it would mostly get rid of the troublemakers, but if it didn't get rid of the troublemakers, at least would take some pressure off of the landowners that were in there. And we would pay everything, including their transportation, their all the way across the ocean, across to Peterborough, and then for a year after they were on their farms. So this is a complete emigration This is the first time it was tried, was 1823, and on the base of 1823, the 1825 migration, both led by Robinson, were brought forward. And that's why we call this an experiment. It's something Wilmot Horton gambled that he could persuade the British Parliament that this was a good idea, that in the long haul, the economics would work out, that the people who were immigrants would buy stuff from Britain, and Britain would make the money back that they had invested in the first instance. Now, it turns out that that might be true, except Peter Robinson's job was to prove it within an 18-month period, and he couldn't do it. The time frame was too short. I call that the Achilles heel of the whole experiment. So the experiment didn't persuade the British Parliament to redo the experiment that they did in 1825, and because of that, we call this the once and only. Now, I've heard different things. Some local groups are saying that there were 300 examples of subsidized emigration during the 19th century, but that's not right. What happened in 1823 and 1825 is unique. After that, the British government says, pushed on by the parliamentary committee that had been experimenting all these ideas, said people are willing to pay to go to immigrate. And some people are. Not normally the lowest elements of a society, but some are willing to pay. So what we have is a complete shift in philosophy, and the British government says those people who need assistance will get it from the landlords, the landowners, the parishes, from local governments, and all of these ways. And we'll do it by using the tax policy to make it work. And we won't spend any British money. So that was the thing, and that's why this is a one and only. Have I used up all my time?
You're getting close.
Okay, if I can go a little bit further, I was quite surprised. The question then of why is Peter Robinson connected with Peterborough was the question that I wanted to ask. So what I decided was to look at all the local histories that had been written in relation to Peterborough. I left mine out, but other ones I looked at. So what we find is surprising, that the Peter Robinson papers and the Peter Robinson experiment are the liveliest parts of all of the local histories. For Poole, he has first-hand information about this because he gets it from Captain Rubidge. He's reading the parliamentary reports on the Emigration Committee in London, and he's reporting this in the report. Then Mulvaney comes along in 1885. Now, I always sort of said Mulvaney is a hack. But it turns out that he went and knew Christopher Robinson, who was the nephew of Peter Robinson, who happened to have all of the Peter Robinson papers in his possession. So he was able to publish a list in Mulvaney of all the immigrants who came out as part of the Peter Robinson emigration. This is 1885. So then I move along to F.H. Dobbin, who is my favorite local historian, one that I've liked much over the years. Turns out that he has also read the Peter Robinson papers. They're in a little tin box that TAS Hay has, that was part of the Historical Society that had been set up at Inverleigh and was moving to the library. So he's fine. Then Howard Pamet comes along, 1928-29, and he finds the Peter Robinson papers in the Peterborough Public Library, and he uses them quite thoroughly. Well, the papers were in all of those 4 locations up to this point. Now, my mother-in-law always said that if three moves is as good as a fire, the question here is how these all survive. Well, then it turns out that the librarian says, we don't have archives, we're books. So they sent the archives off to the Archives of Ontario. The Archives of Ontario was where Edwin Gillette saw them. He was absolutely excited. He said, this is the most impressive collection of papers outside of government records that you're going to find. And he thoroughly included them in a big report that went in the Valley of the Trent, which is a good way for us to get them. But he also persuaded the Archives of Ontario to microfilm the whole works of them, and they went and had saved a lot of those. Well, then Peterborough got a museum, and this was Centennial Museum, 1966, 67, and Anne Heidemann, who was the director, says, those papers belong in Peterborough because Christopher Robinson originally gave them to Peterborough. So she led a force to Toronto and forced the archivist to give up these papers, and they are now one of the treasured archives at the Peterborough Museum and Archives. So the centrality of this collection of papers, which is very unique, it includes all the information about every passenger who went on any of those 9 ships. It includes where they landed. It includes about their location and rations. They're quite thorough. So the result is that's why Peterborough is sort of connected with the Peter Robinson papers. And thank you very much.
Now we have Dennis Carter-Edwards, a retired government historian, and also associated with the Peterborough Historical Society, who's going to tell the story about how the Irish came over to Canada and what they encountered along the way. Dennis.
There's a little button on the top of the projector.
I'll let you hit it because I don't want to play around with it. It's the technology.
Still having trouble hearing.
How about if I say this loud? I learned that teacher voice from my wife. Thank you. Well, first of all, my thanks to the Peterborough Historical Society for the opportunity to do a presentation here this evening. What an amazing crowd. This is so encouraging. I just had a feeling there would be a strong interest in the Irish community for the Bicentennial, and sure enough, you proved it. And this is just the beginning. Wait till we get to August when there are hundreds, nay, thousands of Irishmen gathering on Peterborough to celebrate and commemorate this important milestone in our community. Enough of that. Let's get on with the talk. So here you see what I think is a very moving and very symbolic image, not necessarily of the Peter Robinson, but it does symbolize a group of Irishmen and their families who are about to depart for places unknown. And I look at that and I'm thinking to myself, what a struggle, what a difficult choice these families had to make. Because as you see, probably a local priest or a local important figure, I guess you could say giving a blessing. Because when those families got on board the ship, sure as fate, they'll never see them again. In fact, in Ireland, when there was an immigration program like this, the families celebrated what was called an American wake, because they knew they would never see, whether it was their kin, whether it was siblings, aunts, uncles, neighbors, they were as good as dead. So I try and look at that and imagine those families when Peter Robinson circulated around with the offer of land and free passage, the difficult choices and the thinking that must have gone on in those families. Do we go? Do we stay? What about our kids? What are the future going to be for them here in Ireland and maybe in the new land? So next slide, if someone could advance it for me. Just, I thought I had a little gizmo here, but I don't. So
if you have to face me,
yeah, if you can do it. Can you just turn around, Brendan, and my technical support will
Okay, just turn this around.
help me out.
Okay.
Thanks, Dick.
It's a wise choice not to let me do it. That's for sure. There we go.
So, spring of 1825, with their ticket in hand, the lucky 235, 300 families who were selected by Robinson for this experiment in immigration arrive at the dock ready to board the ship. Now again, try and put myself in the mind and the experience of those families that were gathered there. You can imagine they've got their few personal possessions that they were able to gather to take on board the ship. There are mothers who are thinking, oh, my poor baby, how's he going to manage on this 5-week? The kids are upset. The husband saying, I told you we shouldn't have gone. It was a bad idea. You can imagine the confusion. I like to think of it as when the planes are ready to board and they call out the boarding, and there's this mad rush. Everybody wants to get on, get the spot to put your carry-on where it's safe and you can get at it. So this is 1825, so much different situation for these folks, but still a traumatic, difficult, anxious moment for them. Next one. So how did we actually get to the point where they're ready to get on board the ship? Well, it started off as my colleague Elwood Jones has so very succinctly explained that there was an opportunity by the British government to deal with issues regarding population. And so the immigration experiment was given to Peter Robinson to manage. What he did was he circulated around the lower part of Ireland, around Cork, and selected families based on certain criteria that would be suitable candidates for this experiment. He says in his notes that there were 50,000 families that were interested. He had to limit it, the number of individuals, to about 2,000 people going. So how was it done? Well, he describes it in his correspondence, which is also at the Peterborough Museum and Archives, an amazing collection. I would argue it's probably the best documented example of emigration, sponsored emigration, anywhere in North America. And we have it right here up the hill. It's a real treat, and it's a treasure that we should be very proud of. So this is what Robinson described the procedure, which he outlined in a letter to his superiors, and I'll quote, "When a complement of settlers is on board the ship," so they're on board the ship, "I mustered them all on deck, and in the presence of the master of the ship and the surgeon, each Navy ship was accompanied by a Royal Navy surgeon to make sure that medical issues and medical care was provided to the immigrants. I mustered them all on deck, and in the presence of the master of the ship and the surgeon, I took the original certificate that had been given by the head of each family." So this is what a certificate looks like. So that's kind of like their boarding pass. Here it is that has my identification. It's my family name and the names and the ages of all the children that were part of that family. So when that had been given to the head of the family, it was given to the surgeon, and it was compared to the duplicate in my possession. In other words, Robinson gave one to the family and kept one for himself. Good thought. When I was satisfied that they were of the age and description given in the certificate, and that there was no imposition that had been practiced, they hadn't substituted, sold it, got rid of it to someone else, they were sent below decks. He then went on to add, to choose about 2,000 out of the 50,000 who were anxious to immigrate was found a very difficult and in many cases an ungrateful task. Well, you can imagine, I'm not sure whether people were clamoring to get one of these certificates, but they were like gold to have one of those. Robinson, as Professor Jones mentioned, was an excellent choice to supervise this immigration scheme. He happened to be in London with his brother, John Beverly Robinson, thank you, who was there on government business for the government of Upper Canada. Wilmot Horton was looking for someone to manage this experiment that he had. And Robinson said, well, my brother would be a good candidate. And indeed, he was a good candidate. As Surgeon Reed, who was the surgeon on board the ship Resolution, recorded, and I quote, "Mr. Robinson's exertions and humanity in ascertaining the wants of those about to be embarked cannot be too highly spoken of. Very few individuals would have labored so incessantly for the public good as the emigrant's superintendent. Now, as Professor Jones mentioned, not everyone was so enamored with Peter Robinson's efforts. He was slow in getting some of his reports, and the financial records weren't well kept. But remember, this is the age before Excel spreadsheets where you could track all your expenses and send them off with one click of a keystroke. Next slide, please.
Do you want me to grab your water?
Nope, I'm just about to have a... So we've got the families on board the ship. There, that's where I'll put it. All set to sail. Imagine these are families that have probably never moved more than 5 miles from their little community or neighborhood. Here they are at the harbor in Cork, ready to board a sailing ship for who knows how long on the ocean, to go who knows where and face who knows what. It must have been a tremendous act of both faith and I suspect an act of hope as well. Okay, when you see, this is just an image of on board in below decks where the families were living quarters for the next 5 weeks. So wooden bunks, and if you've been to the Peterborough Museum and Archives, you'll see this wonderful recreation of what it looked like on board the ship in the hold, where the families were squeezed into these little bunks for 5 weeks. Now,
our bunks are 2 inches taller than the actual ones.
yeah. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not a great flyer. I don't like that 5-hour trip across the Atlantic Ocean because you're never sure what the food's going to be like. And who knows what the entertainment's probably going to be a crummy movie you've seen a dozen times. Well, that's nothing what these families had to face. We have, very fortunately, next slide. We have a wonderful description of what life was like and what the routine was like on board the ship for those 5 weeks sailing across the ocean. As I mentioned, each ship, each Royal Navy transport was required to have a surgeon on board. And so the surgeons kept daily records of the patients they treated, what treatment they were given, and the outcome of their treatment. Generally, they were, after a few treatments, were better and able to be off the list. So those records have been transcribed by a company. Elwood, help me out here. Paul Allen. So he has gone to the original documents, the original journals that the surgeons kept that are at the Public Record Office in London, and has transcribed them in very clear, precise, readable English, which is a big help because there's lots of terminology that the surgeons use that I had a hard time with. So what's nice is that we have that information, and you know, it's hard to imagine what those people faced during those 5 weeks on board the ship. Luckily, we have some comments from the surgeon, and I'll only quote one. Surgeon Burnside, who was on the ship Regulus, recorded his observations, his general comments, and then his very specific. He wrote, "I am of opinion nothing prevented sickness amongst them, the Irish, but a discipline of cleanliness. I strictly observed daily employing parties to dry holystone and fumigate the lower decks every morning after breakfast. Tuesdays and Thursdays were days for general inspection of their persons and their clothing. Mondays and Fridays appropriated for washing." So there was, at least on this ship, a very strict regimen of cleanliness inspection to minimize the risk of disease. However, not every ship was apparently as tightly administered as was the Regulus. Surgeon Burney, who was on board the ship John Barry, actually felt compelled to close off the privy on board the ship due to the unsatisfactory state of cleanliness until the unsanitary conditions was remedied. So a lot depended on the discipline and the efforts of the surgeon. Now, each journal gives a detailed account, and I have to watch my time because Professor Jones has set a pretty tough example of being disciplined. I just want diversion because the description of how treatment of illness was in those days is really quite interesting, certainly not for the squeamish. This was the era of heroic medicine, and I can assure you the heroes weren't the doctors. In fact, one doctor is quoted as saying, "Many of my patients got better because of what I did, and a lot of them got better despite what I did." So here's a quote from one of the journals. The standard treatment of this era was, of course, bleeding and purging, and reading various accounts of the patients treated on board is definitely not for the squeamish. One example I think will suffice. Bridget Shanahan, who was age 30, took ill during one night with severe pain in the, what he called, epigastric region, which was accompanied by vomiting and fever. Not a good case. Dr. Burnside said he took 26 ounces of blood from a large orifice at the bend of the arm and prescribed a purgative of castor oil, which he noted operated freely. I can well imagine. At 2 a.m., he bled her again, which produced, quote, a general remission of the symptoms, along with, quote, the bowels freely purged. As I said, it must have been a tough trip. Sick kids, crying kids, smells, and you can imagine. Anyways, next slide. We'll get them across the Atlantic, and they probably see land for the first time, going through the past Newfoundland, up to Quebec City. They must have breathed a huge sigh of relief. Finally, land. Well, not quite. You're not there yet. What we have is a very rough outline of the trip. Next phase, and probably as difficult a phase for these immigrants coming from Quebec City all the way up to Peterborough. So if they were joyous at finally disembarking at Quebec, their journey was far from over. They took a steamer from Quebec to Montreal, a brief rest, on to Lachine, where they were lodged temporarily in barracks that were described as, quote, dirty and crowded, while they waited for transport up the St. Lawrence River through the Long Sault Rapids onto Prescott Military Garrison, where they were, quote, accommodated in a roomy and area barracks, and then on to Kingston. Next slide, please. Just a couple more minutes and I'll be done. So here we have a rough plan of Kingston circa in the 1820s. This will become the site of Fort Henry that we know today. That's in 1830s. Much different fort there as a result of the War of 1812. And when they arrive at Kingston, they are there for almost a month. Robinson was in York, in Toronto, meeting with the lieutenant governor to make arrangements for the land being available for and facilities and equipment and food to be held in Peterborough for the Irish when they arrived. So they're there at Kingston for some time. And again, I quote from one of the surgeons, Dr. Reed of the Resolution, whose notes are amazing. The detail in there is quite specific. And I suspect if there are amongst the audience today descendants of those original 1825ers, you may find one of your ancestors written up in his journals and the medical treatment he gave them. Don't do it on a full stomach. That's all I can say. So this is what Dr. Reed said about conditions in Kingston. Arrived at Kingston 6th of August and took charge of the 6th to the 9th of September. The grounds upon which the immigrants were encamped was on a low beach of the lake on part of Fort Henry, which tended to increase the sick. So I suspect, without being exact precise, it's on the western side of where the fort property is. So there we had a tour of Fort Henry because of the importance in the immigration story. We want the folks at Fort Henry to be ready for the thousands of Irish that are going to be coming there. So it's to the side down towards Navy Bay where one of the towers is located. So he's saying that this low swampy area didn't do much to help the health, which by now must have been quite strained for these poor Irish. Fortunately, he says, Colonel Burke provided hospital tents, and I had them placed on the rising ground of Port Frederick. So second arrow is probably up at the top of the bay there, a little higher up. Again, we don't have anything specific, but I think it's a pretty good guess. The deaths at Kingston were 33, 18 under my charge, the remainder after my departure. So here are these poor families that have made the tough decision to leave, cross the Atlantic, made the trip from Quebec to Montreal, finally get to Kingston, and deceased. So lots of hardship along the way. There was an American visitor to Kingston at the same time who actually recorded his observations, and I'll quote. When I arrived there, there were 700 Irish immigrants encamped in tents on the bare and exposed face of a large hill back of the dockyard. A miserable-looking, hard-working set never were seen. Well, I can imagine they were miserable-looking given what they'd gone through. Next slide. And I'll speed up here because I'm just about out of my time and I want to give enough. So we've got them out of Kingston at Coburg. They're finally ready to move up to Peterborough. As I mentioned, Robinson is in York, meeting with the Lieutenant Governor to ensure there is land surveyed and available for him to place the Irish immigrants. Fortunately, we have one of those survey plans at the Trent Valley Archives, and I thank Elwood for drawing that to my attention, that shows lots that are already occupied, lots that are Crown reserves, and lots that are clergy reserves. So the ones that are marked are lots that are available for the Irish to be settled on, all of course at the expense of the British government. So a great piece of work. Next one. Again, we're fortunate because the records are so detailed. I've transcribed them because the originals are a little hard to read, but it shows you where they are based and the numbers. And the numbers fluctuate between different sources, but it does give a rough idea of where the families were posted. So you can see there from the chart, by far the most in the Newcastle district, 1,860. So a good chunk of those 2,000 Irish that came over ended up in the Peterborough area. Next slide. So we've got the Irish, they draw their lots, they're on their land, and this is what they have to face. So you can imagine an Irish farmer who's got a quarter, maybe 3-acre plot to grow a few potatoes and maybe a cow for some milk. This is what they're facing. They've got virgin forest to cut down, try to plant some agricultural produce, potatoes and so on, in amongst the stumps, and living in a small log cabin that was built for them through the efforts of Peter Robinson, who hired laborers to build the cabin for each of the families. Next slide. And yet, despite that hardship, they thrived. This gives you an indication of the agricultural output that first year. So they're on their land in November, October, November 25. By November the next year, this is what they produced. And I don't know whether you can see that at the back. All of this material will eventually be available on the Nine Ships website. We really want to ensure all this pertinent documentation is available, not just for you, but for those families over in Ireland and the States, Australia, New Zealand, the Irish diaspora all over the globe. So they can see the kind of information they might be able to find when they come here in search of their roots from the families there. Next slide. In 1826, winter of 25-26, Lieutenant Governor Maitland arrives in Peterborough. He wants to see how this experiment is working out, the work that Robinson has done to get the Irish settled on their land. He wants to find out how things are going. And he's met with a delegation of the Irish immigrants that arrived there in 1825 who present him with a formal petition. And I'll quote from it. This is what he said. We, the Irish immigrants, recently brought out by Colonel Robinson, feel grateful to our gracious good king and his majesty's worthy, good, and humane government for all they have, and we hope yet intend to do for us. And should an enemy have the presumption to invade this portion of his majesty's dominion, they shall find that we have no better weapons in our hands to mow them down than with our shillelaghs. We will do it. So, the Irish were able to live up to that promise. In 1839, if you remember a bit of your Canadian history, William Lyon Mackenzie, the rebellions of Upper Canada, American sympathizers, raids across the border. The Irish, from this migration, joined in droves, the local militia, to resist any attempt to take over Crown land by the Americans. So it was a very successful migration in that respect. I'll leave it at that.
I mean, it was a very tough voyage on them. There were people that died, as Dennis said, but you know, one of the good things that came out of that is that there were 17 children born along the way across the Atlantic. So, and you know, we're some of us here tonight are the descendants. Are the descendants, any descendants, direct descendants of 1825? And there's, raise your hands. Oh, look at that. Isn't that fantastic? I think if we look back on who people married back and forth over the last couple of hundred years, we all end up back at 1825. At this point, I'd like to call on Maureen Crowley, who's going to go over a little bit about the website and the events coming up and how you can partake in all of that. Go ahead, Maureen.
Well, hello everybody. Yes, lots of descendants here tonight, I'm sure. Even if you don't know it, you probably are a descendant. Can you hear me all right?
There you go.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about the things that are going to be happening this year. This has been in the planning for at least 10 years. In 2015, a group got together to start to plan the 200th commemoration. So we've been working on it for a long time, and we are working on it with the many folks in the community. So many community partners from Douro and Ennismore and Otonabee and wherever the descendants went, it's Downeyville for sure. We've been working together to plan the 200th commemoration in honor of our descendants, our Irish family. So it's been very successful, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the community. So they're talking about, you know, coming over here. If you can imagine a road trip or a family vacation coming from Ireland with all the family members, but it's not like today, right? It's, you know, in your van. So I figured out that there was probably 640 family parents, mothers and fathers, single teachers, single teenagers and young adults, about 714. So a lot of kids on that ship. And there was about 714 children under 11. So I don't know how they did it. A lot of them had families of average about 7 kids. So it must have been very, very hard and very stressful to manage that. And I think it took about like 4 or 5 months, right? So yeah, so they're very, very strong people. Anyways, for the commemoration, throughout the year there's going to be events happening. If you can get on our website, 9 Ships, I don't know if anybody's were able to get on it. 9 Ships, 1825, it'll show all the events that are happening throughout the year. A lot of things are going to be happening now in March, especially for St. Patrick's Day. So a lot of our community partners in Ennismore, Douro, Downeyville will have special events on. And especially the Peterborough Canadian Irish Club, because this is our 50th anniversary. So we'll be celebrating with 2 major events. One will be August the 2nd. It's called the Grand Irish Gathering, and you're going to want to get tickets for that. It's going to be at the Canadian Canoe Museum. Another is an historic boat trip down the Otonabee River, and we'll have actually Dawn will be portraying a ship surgeon on that, and we'll be talking about the journey that they would have taken, and I guess
Without the Irish accent.
without the Irish, yes, you'll have an Irish accent, I'm sure. No, okay, all right. Anyways, all these events will be on our website, or continuing to work on them. Some of them are still need to be, you know, finalized. But if you can get on our website, you can find out what's going on. Oh, well, there you go. Great. Okay, so can somebody? Oh, it's not live. Okay. So there's an events page on there, and there will be a registration page, and then you'll be able to buy tickets through the website. So that will probably be in about another 2 or 3 weeks. We'll have that, and you'll be able through Eventbrite. So check that out, and you're going to have to register and get your tickets because it's going to be very popular. There will be also descriptions of what's going on. And also what's happening in with our county partners too. In July, I think there's we got happening in July. And July 4th, 6th, 4, 5, and 6 in Durrow. There's a 200th. There's also the 200th commemoration of our communities as well. Ennismore has events happening on the 12th and the 13th, July 19th in Downeyville, and again July 19th in Ennismore. So you have to really go on the website and check and see what's going on so you can be part of it. So it's going to be a really busy year, and lots of exciting things happening. And we're also expecting people from all over. We have had some great people looking at our website from all over the world, even like China, if you can imagine, and Australia. So we're getting lots of interactions. In fact, our website, it went viral, and we had to look into getting maybe more, I guess, technology on it because we couldn't handle it. So there's got lots of interest out there. Yeah, so it's good, and so we hope you can all can make it, and I think it'll be just a great time to get everybody together, and we're also having a heritage fair as well at the Bishop's House, the Knights of Columbus. So we'll have displays, Knights of Columbus Halls. We'll have displays set up, and the community partners will have their displays. There will be things to place to get information. There'll be a welcome center. You can connect with maybe other descendants coming in. So it'll be a great opportunity to meet up with other people, maybe family members from all over the world. So anyways, lots of good things happening, and just keep checking out that website. And so it's all good.
Thank you, Maureen. And it really is an amazing website. A lot of work has gone into it. There's all kinds of history on there. Really, that's the information highway for what we're trying to set up here during this year. At this point, I'd like to call on Mary to give us a little rundown. Mary's been spending some time talking to our friends in Ireland.
Thanks, Brendan. If you want to I've got a few slides I'll speak to, and Karen, if you could just move to the next one, please. And I might say if you could register on this website to get our newsletter, be sure to go in and do that. You can also register your interest for events. We aren't fully registering for tickets yet, but you can at least get in there and get your name on our email list. So I just want to remind everybody, I think Ken Armstrong's here tonight. Do you want to wave? Ken, where are you? I saw you. Has he gone already? Oh, he had to go. Sorry about that. Anyway, Ken Armstrong was the chair of the Homecoming 75, the 150th anniversary of the Peter Robinson Irish Emigration, and he kept a wonderful album of photos and memorabilia from that event, and we want to have it on display at the Heritage Fair in August 1st to the 8th at the Knights of Columbus Hall. But you can see it was great fun, and the scow that they built here, I think, Shelley, are you on that scow, do you think? You are. It was quite an experience, because every week for something like 6 weeks or so, they had different townships get volunteers together and dress up and get on the scow and go across Little Lake. So what a wonderful project that was. And the plaque here that was, and correct me if I'm wrong, Elwood, but that was erected in Victoria Park at that time. You'll see it when you drive by on Water Street, and the Lieutenant Governor was here for that event, correct?
It was erected much earlier, about 1958.
Okay.
But it is in the Courthouse Park.
It's in, Courthouse Park as you drive up Water Street. So if you could go to the next slide, please, Karen. So we just want to say that we're very grateful for funding from the Canadian Heritage Department of the Government of Canada, and we, as Brendan said, have been very fortunate that we've had private individuals who have donated to our work so that we can spread the word far and wide about this commemoration. Next slide, please. And these are just logos I threw up there of some of the community groups. We've got so many partners in all this, and you can see historical societies. It's interesting because Ennismore, Durrow, Downeyville, Trent Lakes, and others have developed their own special logo for this year. But we're just we're just so thrilled to see they all have a whole year of events almost. So do watch for those. We're going to be pushing that information out as time goes on. Next slide. And this is about what's happening in Ireland. In Ballyhoura region, the Economic Development Corporation, I connected with them back in 2013. My husband and I were at an event in Wicklow County called Canada Come Home. It was during the gathering year, and during that time, the woman who organized it made sure that we got up to Ballyhoura with another couple from Lakefield, and we met Amanda Slattery. She was in charge of tourism for the Ballyhoura region at that time, and she had us meet with a little group of volunteers, and they had a little Bristol board picture on the wall of Peter Robinson, and they were already interested in doing research, doing cemetery recordings, trying to gather information of the families that were left back in Ireland. So they're very keen. This is basically what they're doing in September. We're having our events August 1st to 10th, focused, certainly different groups in July are doing events, but the Bicentennial events that we're organizing as a committee are August 1st to 10th. But then we get to relax and go to Ireland, which is great. So you may want to call Marlin Travel tomorrow, because they have September 15th to the 21st, a series of bus tours, speakers, all kinds of music. It's going to be wonderful. And accommodation is tight in Ireland because it just is right now. So Mary LaRocque at Marlin Travel is really encouraging people to get booked now. It is the place to go, Ireland, apparently now for holiday. So next slide, and this is my last slide, and there is the group in Ireland. They met last week. They're all waving at you because they are so excited. They are doing their work to receive visitors in September, and the fellow down here, right here, in the front row, Christy Roach. Christy's been over a couple times, and we've taken him around to visit different groups and communities and individuals. And he's writing a book about families of the Peter Robinson immigrants. He's writing a book about the families that were left behind. So they're doing lots of work planning for the event that will come up in September. And stay tuned. You'll hear more. You can get to that by going to our website as well if you look at the Irish links. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. You know, when I look into that picture, and I look into this room, it's pretty much the same faces as far as I can tell. But we do, there's all kinds of information on the website. There's lots of things happening in the summer. There's a play coming on, Crossing Over. That's the Peterborough Historical Society in May. And there's also Trent Valley Archives. And the Fourth Line Theatre is also having a play, the Wild Irish Geese. Is Kim here? Kim, why don't you just give a little plug on that, when that's happening?
Yeah, it's, hi everyone, I'm Kim Blackwell, I'm the Artistic Director at Fourth Line, and Megan Murphy, who is, through her Galvin side, I believe it is a descendant, has written a new work called Wild Irish Geese. Megan will also be starring in it as the Shanachie, which those of you who are really, really Irish know is the person in the community who is the keeper of the stories, and I feel like Megan is that for this community in lots of ways. So it is going to be a large-scale play. I think we're going to do our volunteer auditions this Sunday. If anybody has a desire to be in the play, we are looking for descendants and people in the community to be in the play. But we're so excited that Megan will be in it. Paul Croak from Ennismore, many of you will know Paul, who is a descendant. Paul will be starring in it as well. Nancy Towns from Duro, and her cousin Patty Shaughnessy, who is from both Curve Lake and Duro, and they're all descendants. They're all going to be in lead roles. We're thrilled. It's going to be a big show. How we're going to do 9 shifts. We're going to replicate those 9 shifts in the barnyard. But we're on from July 30th till the end of August for 25 performances. we're already 11% of the way sold out for the whole run. So get your tickets. Yeah, I'm really excited. For February, if you book in the month of February and you buy 4 tickets, you get reserved seats, which if you've ever been to our theater and you're not a donor, that's always a big deal. No, it's going to be a wonderful play, and Megan has written a beautiful play that is both funny and irreverent and also very historical. And M. John Kennedy, who is a local fellow, he went to St. Peter's High School, same with Megan and Nancy Towns. He's going to be playing Peter Robinson. And in fact, he just agreed today, he's going to be the Grand Marshal, and I guess I'm just giving something away here, the Grand Marshal of the St. Patrick's Day Parade as Robinson. So Peter Robinson will rise from the ashes in the grave, and he will be the Grand Marshal of the parade. So we're very excited. And Michelle Chesser, who's also a local gal who went to St. Pete's with all of those folks, is going to be designing the set and acting in it with a couple of her kids. And one of Megan's nieces is going to be in the show as well, so another Robinson descendant. Okay, I've done enough there.
Thanks, Ken. We do have some time for questions, so to any of the presenters. So we're going to take a few. We've got a few minutes, so let's start here.
Why was Peterborough chosen the area for this immigration group?
Why was Peterborough chosen as the area for the immigration group? Elwood, maybe that was one for you. Try and keep it brief, and then we'll have a big question.
There's no precise answer to that. What we know is that when the 1823 group came out and settled in the Ottawa Valley area, there were an incident that involved the Scots versus the Irish in that area. And so the feeling was that maybe the Irish, especially because 1823 was a small migration compared with 1825, that maybe it's better for 1825 to put them where they're not near the Scots. And so that's one reason. The other reason is that this area had only opened for settlement after 1818 when we had the treaty with the First Nations here. So that's another factor.
Thanks, Elwood. Have another question at the back here? Is that Bill? Go ahead.
I think it's Mike.
You talked about the reaction of the settlers to the 1837 rebellion. What about during the Fenian raids, where there was a lot of Irish coming up and attacking?
Elwood, that would be one for you.
The Fenians weren't from Peterborough, though.
Speak into that, Mike.
The Fenians were from the States. True enough, I actually have some medals from the Fenian raid, and they were given out in 1890. They got a Canadian Service medal. It's quite nice. Red and white ribbon goes with it. And what I've got in my sample shows that there are Irish. There was Fitzgerald, for example, and also from the earlier migration that occurred in 1818, the Cumberland settlers who settled along what is now Chemong Road and north of Park Hill. So they definitely were still around for the Fenian raid too.
Brandon, I could just add one word. It raises a very interesting question for Mark. How did this group of Irish who came to North America, settled in Peterborough, how did they retain their Irish props, their language, their culture, their religion? How did they keep their Irishness and yet adapt to the environment and the surroundings in their new home? So it's an ongoing debate between cultural adaptation and cultural retention. And that's not just the story of the Irish, that's a universal story. But we think that the Irish experience offers a real opportunity to examine some of these issues because of the excellent documentation we have for things like the rebellions and the Fenian raids and other things. When they stand up and talk about our good and gracious King George, and I'm thinking, is this the same group that were rioting? And so there's lots of food for academics and historians and families to ponder over.
And on that point, the torch. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Over 30 men left from Ennismore to join the Fenians at Rochester one night. They were Johnny MacDonald and Gilbert McMegan, who was the head of his kind of secret service spy agency,
Thank you, Patrick. Here.
You mentioned the idea that part of this was to populate the upper Canada for the British.
Correct.
Was that part of the original
Rationale?
decisions in Westminster? Have you been able to find anything concrete about that?
Well, they certainly referred to turning them into good, loyal British subjects. And if you look at the history of immigration policy in Britain, 1815, 16, retired British soldiers given land in around the Ottawa Valley area, Richmond Township. The 1818, 1819, sending over more settlers to provide a strong, loyal core in case the Americans, even though they got a whooping in 1815, decided they might want to make another try to occupy. So the idea was to bring good, loyal British subjects who would form a militia that would rally to the defense of the colony, of the border, if it ever came to that. And Lord knows we'll be there again if they join us.
Put your hat down. Okay, back here.
Did the Irish settlers have a relationship with the Anishinaabe when they came?
Yes, they did. That's our understanding. Elwood?
We don't have a lot of documentation on that, but we do know that when the Lieutenant Governor came for the 14th of February, 1827, Francis Stewart, who had come, Thomas A. Stewart and the Reeds had come in 1822, and they were on the what is now Armour Road, just north of Park Hill. And they sent off to the First Nations in order to get venison, ducks, and other things for the celebration of that moment. So it was kind of, that's pretty early. That's the earliest that I could see. Later we get, see, Curve Lake doesn't really set up until about 1829. And we know that when we get to Catherine Parr Trail certainly talks about having relations with the Anishinaabe, sort of two kinds. One was that Chief Peter Nogie came to visit at different times, and was a fairly regular visitor, I sort of felt. And there was also an Indian woman who came fairly regularly to sell baskets to Susanna Moody and Catherine Parr Trail. So there is elements of it. But it's not overwhelming.
One of the more interesting points that I have heard along the way is during the famine years, there was a lot of struggling in the Irish community in Ontario, and I believe that the local First Nations, correct me if I'm wrong, actually went out of their way to raise money and to send it off to help. I'm not sure the exact details, but
we have this on the webpage, nine ships, but the famine in 1847, they raised funds both for the Irish and also for Scots up in northern thing, but it was fundraising activities that occurred, and there was quite a bit of it going on in Upper Canada as well as in Britain and in Ireland and things like that. And here, all of the groups that were tied with the Anishinaabe made donations to that. And rather interesting was the comment by Chief Peter Nogie that they did this because they had such friendly neighbors who were Irish, and they sympathized with the struggle that Irish were having elsewhere. They said they would have given a lot more, except the government was too cheap to give them enough money.
Yes.
Do you know if the 9 ships traveled together?
No.
We know that they didn't travel together. They left at different times. The earliest left about May 3rd, and the last one left by May 31st. So they've and all of them have most of them do about 30 days. But the John Barry, which was the last to leave, actually took the full five weeks and seemed to have more trouble than the other ship. But for the whole part, I was quite impressed with the quality of the ships that were hired by the Royal Navy. These were ships that would have been used for the Royal Navy for transporting troops and things like that. And so we're not talking here about the kind of cheap ships that were used for shipping squared timber from America and then just filled the hold all the way back. They were better ships.
John?
Sorry, in defense of the John Barry being last, they did run aground on a sandbar just off of Sept-Îles, Quebec, and had to get themselves off, and then they were pumping for the next 4 days to Quebec. So, and it wasn't their fault because the sandbars changed, and they were uncharted. That one was uncharted as they were sailing through. So there was a reason. They weren't just slow.
Yes?
Yes, I was Hello at Elwood. I would like to know a little bit more about the Peter Robinson Island on the Otonabee River, and I mentioned to you about my relatives owning that property they came from Northern Ireland.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, that's a good question, and probably people who were counting will notice that I didn't deal with the third question that I said I would deal with, which was whether Peter Robinson was a good leader. I feel strongly that he was a good choice, and I've argued that that part of the reason he's chosen is because the decisions that would have to be made in the area between Coburg and Peterborough required somebody who would be able to get along with the locals who had been there earlier. Not that there'd been a lot of them, but there were locals that were there. So Peter Robinson had to arrange for upgrading the road that went from Coburg to Sully, or now Harwood, and he did that partly using some of the Irish settlers who were just coming in, but also people who were local. So he had to work with the justices of the peace in order to make that work. The next option was how to get from Rice Lake to Peterborough, and what he discovered was that the water was low that season, but on top of that, the Otonabee is a fairly narrow and twisty road, and particularly in the area of what is now called Robinson's Island, which is about a mile south of the Yankee Bonnet, that in that area there's a very sharp turn to go through. So the result was that Robinson's Island was an obstacle, shall we say, in terms of this kind of thing. There's some suggestion that some of the trips, well, let me go back to this. Robinson then decided that since he'd used his Irish and local laborers to try to figure a navigation route up the Otonabee, and that wasn't going to work, they went to plan B and they built a boat, a flat-bottom boat, and we saw the image of that as a reconstruction in 1975, but the boat was designed to be about 60 feet long, 8 feet wide, could carry up to 30 people with their luggage and that. That was built in a period of about 8 days at Sully, and included some of the people from the Irish immigrants who helped in putting that together. And so that turned out to come through. So this is, to me, a kind of interesting illustration that Peter Robinson had the connections and he had the insight. His experience earlier as having been in the fur trade for years. He was a merchant in Newmarket. He'd been an MPP in Toronto. Howard Pamet didn't like Peter Robinson, said it was a bad choice. And his main reason is that when he looks at all the records that are in this magnificent collection that we've talked about that's now in the museum, he goes and quibbles about, because he says now it's incidents to second guess Robinson, and he thinks that Robinson is too rich. At any rate, that's the story that goes with that. Now,
Can we take more questions, maybe?
I'm still answering that question.
Still answering that.
In 1922, the Heritage Commission was set up to, whatever they call it, the Heritage Conservation, to go for historical plaques. And somebody from Peterborough, and I haven't found out who, went and recommended that a historical plaque be put on Robinson's Island commemorating the 1825 emigration. I was surprised because I thought that if you're going to you'd put it somewhere close to Peterborough. That's a good 4 miles to to Peterborough. But that's so there is a bit of a history that runs around it. Sorry about that.
Maybe we have one or two more questions, and that'll be it. Go ahead,
I
sir.
have two questions, but one, if we go back exactly 200 years to what's today, January the 22nd, 1825, were there families at that point, at this point in time, that knew that they would be part of the experiment?
No, they didn't know until April of 1825. Robinson himself wasn't sure on how they could go. So in effect, this recruitment process was done in a matter of 6 weeks at the most, and those pamphlets that announced that emigration apparently attracted 50,000 possible people wanting to go. So it was popular, and I think part of it because 1823 had been enough of a success that there was still word of mouth in the Blackwater Valley, because we're going to the same area that we were in 1823. And the word of mouth was positive enough that people actually trusted Robinson, which is another good reason for why he would be a good choice in 1825.
Well, one last question. Is this the same Peter Robinson that was Captain Peter Robinson who was head of 3 divisions of militia in York that were present with Brock at the capture of Detroit?
Indeed, that's true. Yes.
And I understand he was born in Nova Scotia, isn't it?
New Brunswick.
New Brunswick, yeah.
Boy, a gold star for someone with a really good history background. So good on you.
Yeah.
Listen, folks, do your history.
One more question?
I think there was a question.
At the back? Go ahead.
There's been a continuing awareness around this area of Peter Robinson and the settlement, 1825 experiment. I was just curious as to how aware Court was at the same time. Like, you know, they had a homecoming 50 years ago. But I mean, how aware were they? Did it have to be brought to their attention, or were they generally aware at that end?
Hey, Janice, maybe you take that.
Yeah, good question. And as Mary mentioned, in 2013, we were, my wife and I were part of a small delegation that went over to the Canada Come Home event. And I did a presentation to the community there on the story of Peter Robinson. And what a great story it was about the Irish coming over. I'm going on and on, as I sometimes do. And I'm looking around the audience, and it's blank. Not a, oh yeah, no recognition at all. I was shocked that there was so little recognition. And then I got thinking about it. We've got a story in Ireland today of the British government sponsoring the immigration of Irish out of Ireland to the colony. It did not resonate with the narrative of Irish history. And so there was a little bit of homework to do to bring awareness of the significance of that story, certainly to us here in Ontario, but also the significance of it in Ireland to those families who stay behind.
Since they held a wake when they were leaving, I expect it was out of sight, out of mind.
Well, maybe for the British. I'm not so sure the neighbors unless you're going along with them.
We're going to have to wrap it up. I want to thank John Willcock for hosting this with the Peterborough Historical Society. I want to thank as well everybody for coming out. This is a really great turnout. Thank you for coming. The torch has passed to us from the people that came in 1825 to carry it forward with Irish culture into the future. And you people here tonight are obviously a great example of what our own children will look forward to in the decades ahead. But at that, I'll turn it over to Don, and thank you for coming.
On behalf of the Peterborough Historical Society, we thank everybody for coming. And as I mentioned before, there is material at the back if you can get